From Boss Track, it's Her Hype Squad, a show about amazing women who've made incredible strides as leaders in their industry. They're here to support you and your leadership growth, to encourage you and hype you up as part of your Hype Squad. Hey everyone, it's Michelle Harris here to bring you an all-new episode of Her Hype Squad with Boss Track. Today I'm talking with Allison Mairena, VP of People for NewGlobe, an international education company. We talk about career transitions, self-advocacy, the importance of peer support, some great advice for what to do and what not to do to uplevel your LinkedIn profile, and so much more. But before we get into the conversation, I'll share Allison's bio to set the stage. Allison Mairena specializes in building and scaling people operations practices, particularly for rapidly growing startups and international teams. Currently, she serves as the VP of People for NewGlobe, an international education company providing innovative curriculum and transformative technical services to public schools. Recently leading the people and talent function at connectRN, she led the organization through COVID-19 and the transition to remote supportive work. There, Allison developed and executed the HR strategy as the company grew 4 times year over year. Prior to connectRN, Allison served as the head of people at CozyKin, a tech-enabled childcare service, and talent acquisition teams at EF Education First and Cengage, hiring globally and nationally respectively. Being a very mission-driven professional, Allison has worked predominantly for companies which make a societal impact in the edtech, healthtech, famtech spaces. She believes in a human-first approach, advocating for employees' well-being and amplifying voices from underrepresented groups. If you enjoy my conversation with Allison, be sure to subscribe to our channel and help more people find us by sharing this episode with others or by leaving a review. Or subscribe to our weekly newsletter filled with things we found that we're excited about and were inspired by, along with valuable leadership advice to watch, listen to, or read. It's just a little bit of joy for your inbox each Monday. You can subscribe at www.thebosstrack.com/weeklyjoy. Now let's get into my conversation with Allison Mairena. Hi, Allison. I'm so happy to have you here on Her Hype Squad with Boss Track. I'm excited to dive into our conversation and can't wait to talk to you all about our topic today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Michelle.
Yes, of course. Of course. So I'd love for you to start out. We've given your formal bio to everybody in advance, but I'd love for you to kind of talk about who you are, what you do to everybody so they can hear it in your own words.
Yeah, so my name's Allison Mairena. I am recently married, so you may have seen me on LinkedIn as Allison Sproul previously. Same person, not like a real Slim Shady please stand up situation over here. It's me. And so I am in the people space and have been for well over a decade at this point. Started my career internationally in China with an ed tech company called EF Education First, and got some really wonderful global exposure there in my career. Moved back stateside to Boston, which is where I've been based now for the past decade-ish, and have been able to kind of climb the ladder in the TA space first, and then moved over to more of the HR side. Gosh, about 6 years ago now, and have been in a variety of earlier stage startups through late stage pre-IPO, scale ups, to now being what I would currently describe as like a teenagery scale up. Like we're 15 years old, we're international, so I get to be in that fun space again. And also back in ed tech. So really, really excited to be there. I'm very passionate about the education industry. I actually started my career as an English teacher in China. So that's where the China thing came into play at first, before going into recruiting and training teachers, actually. So that's always a fun part of my story. And because we were working with folks from all over the world at that company, I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'd like to consider myself a global citizen. I try to remind myself that even though I am based in the US, that oftentimes it's really important for me to zoom out and think about the bigger picture as opposed to just, a narrow American focus. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I know this is kind of getting off topic already, but I would love to hear your perspective just working in China, how it differed from being in the US, just to get your perspective.
Sure. Well, I can't say I have an up to date take
Yeah,
on the experience, right?
of
Because this would
course.
have been
Yeah.
about 12 years ago at this point.
Right.
However, at that time, I think there's obvious, the language barrier was always fun. I will say it's kind of funny when you don't look like you'll speak a local language. If you lean into a group of gossiping women and just say in their local language, "Oh, really?" They will erupt in like giggles and be very worried that you're going to like go and tell people whatever they were gossiping about. So
I love that.
yeah. Um, so yeah, beyond the language barrier, of course, and I did minor in Mandarin as a disclaimer, so it wasn't too terribly bad for me when it came to that standpoint. Really, I think the biggest kind of cultural difference that I experienced in the workplace related to communication styles. And so I am the epitome of the American employee in that I am very direct and I mean what I say and say what I mean, right? Which unfortunately was sometimes perceived as trying to be bossy, which was not my intention at all, but
Right.
rather just noting, uh, here's this is fact of what is happening. So I needed to adjust to more of the Chinese communication style and their principle of guanxi as well, which is kind of like being very reciprocal. So if you do this for me, I'll do this for you type deal. And you have to really read the air and start to listen for what is the meaning behind what they're saying that they aren't actually saying, right? So it wasn't necessarily a skill that I learned in a day, but adapting by adding in phrases like "I'd be happy to do this" or "Would it be possible to help with XYZ?" Those sorts of things helped me to soften what was a very, direct approach to with my coworkers, which I have, well, I afterwards heard they very much appreciated.
Good.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine transitioning into the startup space, that being direct is very helpful to when you're moving fast and being private equity
Mhm.
backed now, that it's a skill that is much needed in that space.
Definitely. So
Yeah.
I can't say it is a theme that is shared by everyone in my company,
Yeah.
but you know what? The goal is for us to get there so we
Yeah.
can ultimately deliver great education to children across the world. So
Very nice. Very good. Well, thank
yeah.
you. Thank you for explaining that. I love I mean, just different cultural experiences, especially when you say China. I know it's very different than when you're talking about being in Europe. And even Europe has its nuances and differences, but it's very, very insightful. So, well,
Sure.
being in the
And
people space.
shortly before we move on to the next thing, I
Oh,
do just
yeah.
want to plug a very quick book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer.
Okay.
She's a professor at, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the acronym of this university correctly, but INSEAD. It's
Oh, yeah.
a university that's in Paris, very well known in the business space. And she is an American citizen, or was one originally, but has lived in France for many years. And it's all about how there are different cultural dimensions that all of us navigate. There are eight of them, whether it be in terms of direct or implied communication styles, decision making, evaluating, persuasion. And so, really, really interesting book to see a combination of, what how cultures at a larger scale typically approach these different facets of business. And you can use that knowledge, not exclusively, but pair that with your knowledge of someone's individual personality traits and what they bring into the office to help make the working dynamic between those of different cultures a lot easier. So, really
Hmm.
fascinating.
Interesting. You said that was called Culture Map?
The culture map.
The
Yep.
Culture Map. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we'll share that in our show notes as well, so people can check that out. And so
Yeah.
I'll check that out. I honestly have not come across that book, so it's like always one of the benefits of having these conversations. I learn about so many new books that I had not heard of before. So talking about people, and you're in the people space, one of the things we're going to talk about is self promotion. And I'd love for you to start out by talking about what is the benefit of self promotion, and how like, so our audience is primarily women, and women in a leadership role, some new, some further along. Like, what is the benefit of self promotion to someone's career?
Yeah. So I learned early on in my career that you're always going to be your best advocate. And especially when I was more junior, I would typically try to pick my next job based on who the manager was. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. However, where I ran into trouble with that was when I thought that this VP at a company that I was working at was really the end all be all. And I wanted to take this job so that way I could learn from her. And it turns out she is not someone who I would consider a great person to learn from. That person also did an org restructure 2 weeks after I accepted the role, totally
Mm.
changing the scope of the position that I had originally accepted. And although I did still ultimately roll up to her, the lessons I learned were how not to run a people and talent function, unfortunately, which
Mm.
is important,
Yeah.
right? But um, naturally, in that situation, I needed to look inward and determine, okay, in my career, do I want to continue to climb the corporate ladder in the discipline which I'm in now, which at that time was on the talent acquisition side of the HR umbrella. And looking introspectively, I knew that was not necessarily the case. I had done it, for many years and felt like I had accomplished what I'd wanted to in that
Hmm.
area. And I really wanted to expand into other areas of HR. And so, even though I had, um, sorry, expressed to that VP as well as the director at the time and my manager that I was dreadfully bored in the work that I was doing, and I did not want a raise or a different title change. I just genuinely wanted to do more work, so that way I could continue to challenge and grow. The response was, well, we could just hire somebody else to do that who's a subject matter expert. And I'm just like, that's just poor business practice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so instead of being able to learn from the people in my direct reporting line, I went outside of the company, right? So it was at that time that I decided to pursue my SHRM SCP, which is Society for Human Resources Management Senior Certified Professional. And actually, in a prep class, uh, I was originally just going to go for the baseline certification of certified professional. And my professor said, "You're answering all these questions in class. Why don't you go for the senior certification?" And to my surprise, when I passed the exam, it was a huge ego boost for myself because I did, in fact, know all of this information. that I wasn't sure that I necessarily did because I had spent so much time on the talent acquisition side as opposed to the other assets or facets rather of HR. So even going beyond that particular prep course and exam, I've continued to really prioritize my own professional development. And so I think it's really important for every employee, but maybe especially women, to not just rely on the situation that you have, whether it be a group of inadequate leaders or maybe even specifically within your function. Don't be afraid to find a mentor who is in another discipline. So, I had a really great relationship there outside of the talent acquisition team with somebody who was in the communications department. And that has been really helpful, as it turns out, on the HR side of the house, right? Um, and marketing is another great partner. Finance can be a really great partner to HR. And so don't be afraid to get some of that guidance internally in your company in a different department. Or if you don't have faith in anyone at your company, that there are resources out there that don't necessarily even have to be paid for you to develop yourself. And so, yeah, I would say don't rely on your surroundings. You are the only one who can get after your goals. And
Yeah.
so to position yourself for what you are looking to do, you may need to seek additional education or training or certification programs. And you should check to see if your company does have a professional development budget, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But that's okay, because you can always ask Chat GPT, and maybe you'll get an interesting bit of insight on there for free.
That's true. That is true. Chat GPT. I was reading an article about Chat GPT, and they were getting, instead of going to like a career coach, they decided they were going to do a test and go to Chat GPT and ask questions that I would have asked a career coach. That was pretty good information. I mean, it wasn't quite exactly what they would have expected, but it was enough to guide them to the next self-service, like the next thing they should look at. So I mean, it's only going to get better, right? So
Exactly. The more
when
inputs,
you
the smarter it gets.
yeah, exactly. When you were in that role and you decided you needed more, what was, so besides going out and getting your SHRM certification, did you end up moving roles within the company, or is that like what was the next step for
I
you?
didn't actually. They continued to hire more people, and I continued to be bored. So, in combination with not feeling particularly engaged in the role and also not necessarily morally aligning with some of the things that were said by that aforementioned VP of talent acquisition, I decided that I was not necessarily a culture or a values fit for that company. And so that's actually when I made my transition into the beauties of startup land. So
Got it. Got it. Thank you. And would you mind sharing, because I think it's insightful for people to hear, what is it about the person that you really wanted to work for them? What did you think about them going into it? And what do you think how could you have maybe looked at them differently to see so it might not have been the experience you were, or is it something you would have only known by actually working for the person?
I don't think I could have detected beforehand that we were not aligned from a moral perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this specifically relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That particular individual made a comment in a whole HR team meeting saying that we had checked the box for that
Oh,
year by creating one employee resource group for LGBTQ plus
yeah.
employees.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there were no resources for any BIPOC employees, for anyone who was neurodiverse. It was exclusively one group that wasn't even, and there wasn't really any HR involvement because the group was co-founded by two directors in the product management team to support the company's LGBTQ population. And so, yeah, when she made that comment, because I was like, oh, I was really excited. I wanted to expand upon that. I found some free career fairs where the majority of the attendees identified as BIPOC. And so I was like, this seems like an easy win-win. There's no cost to the business. We can follow, this goal that was trickled down directly by the CEO to say, we want to build a more diverse and inclusive workforce, right? And so it was just like clear misalignment there. Like if your VP is saying, good on this goal when clearly you've only gone a small percentage of the way there, it was just, I am a big believer in controlling the controllables. And at the individual contributor level at that company, I knew that I was not going to be able to really move the needle there in that capacity. And so I went somewhere where I knew I could make an impact.
Got it. And when you thought externally before you worked for this person, was it more just her role and like the level she had achieved? And you're like, I think I can learn so much from this person. Is that kind of where you're?
Talent acquisition is an interesting space because it's really like a sales and marketing function, right? And so I think she's just one of those people who is really good at, turning on when the time is right. And so she had a very convincing sales pitch for me to join that company and that team to build out that programming for them. And so I was intrigued by the opportunity to build something special in an industry that I continue to be passionate about. So I was like, oh, this is everything that I'm looking for. It's still contributing in the education space. It's still in a role where I can know that I can drive value, and it's building something new, which is ultimately what made me move on from the first international job that I had, even though I really loved being there and all of the cultural learnings from, having such an international team. I was continued to do the same thing over and over again. And so for me personally, I don't need a lot of structure. I enjoy the variety. And so, startups, being a person that's building new processes and then helping to scale them is really my personal sweet spot. So I did not know that about myself at that time, though, because I had only really experienced enterprise level organizations. And so ultimately after that, I went into startups where it was like, I was the exact opposite problem. I definitely wasn't bored. I was way over my head, but I don't think there was any kind of indicator that I would have been able to detect at that point in my career. I guess if I had asked more behavioral questions. So I am a big believer in behavioral interviewing and risk assessment recruiting. And when you're looking for a job and vice versa, you are interviewing a candidate for a job, you want to ask questions to receive specific examples from the answerer. And based on those experiences, that past behavior will predict their future behavior and therefore their ability to do that job. But, as a candidate, you also have to make sure that you are interviewing that person to see if it's the right fit for you. And I think that I was caught up in the excitement of rejoining the education industry and being able to build a totally new program. And I still believe that company's products are great and to help probably millions of students, maybe thousands. I don't know exactly how far the reach is. It's been a while since I've been there. But yeah, I'm still a fan of that company. It was mainly that individual and she did not end up working out there either.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, people can make such a big difference. And thank you for sharing that. I asked that because I recently had a podcast guest on, and they said the same thing that they had this scorecard that was used by a talent agency, but it was used for talent acquisition. But it was like she turned it around and used it as a scorecard when she interviews companies. She'll use
mhm.
that scorecard to actually interview the company. So I like the idea and haven't had many conversations at all about making sure that you're interviewing the company when you're looking as well as not
Well, it
just,
kind of ties into the self promotion piece,
yeah,
right? In
yeah,
that, like, a lot of times, I think women in particular will forget about their own needs and wants and
yeah.
put others ahead of themselves, whether it be putting the needs of the business ahead of themselves, right? Or in the case of a job search, like, okay, well, maybe this compensation level is really exciting for financially supporting my family. So maybe I'll just bend on my morals, or maybe I'll go into an industry that I'm not really excited about because then I can, pay for my daughter's dance lessons or whatever it
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
right? And so I think there's a little bit of an opportunity cost there, right? And we
yeah.
need to be mindful of what our needs are, and sometimes to a certain degree, right? Because it is a tough job market right now, especially for people in talent acquisition folks. Um, just really clarify what you need and what your hard stops are, whether it be in a job search or just within your day-to-day job, right? Because
Mhm.
there are people who will stay in jobs that they're ultimately quite unhappy in, and that doesn't serve themselves or the company that they're at if they're just doing meh work that they're
Right,
not really excited about.
right. That's so true. And speaking of self promotion, do you have an example of maybe in your case or somebody you've seen where they've used self promotion successfully to drive their career growth and move into a higher level role?
Sure. So this story is a little bit unusual and relates to the first startup that I worked for. So that company did not have anybody in the people ops role at that time. There were 24 employees, so super small, seed funded stage.
Mm, mhm,
And that was when I had my realization that I really wanted to shift my career to be more people focused as opposed to recruitment focused. And if my role still involved recruiting, like, sure, that's great. But I didn't want it to be the only thing I was doing. And so I interviewed for their first people ops hire role. And in the middle of the final interview, which from my perspective was going very well, the co founder said to me, "Hey, do you have any desire to be our head of recruitment?"
mm,
And I told them no. So I was like, ultimately, I've determined that my, you know, end game career goal at this point is to be a chief people officer. And if I really want to round out my portfolio of experience under the HR umbrella, I need to be positioning myself in a role that isn't so exclusively focused on the talent acquisition side. And they said, okay, well, we respect that. We really like your experience of the high volume recruiting experience from your first company. If you have any friends from that organization who may be interested in this recruiting role, we'd consider it a great professional courtesy if you made a referral. So naturally, I go to tell my friend Jana about this job. And you know what happened? I convinced myself that I was, in fact, interested in the job. And so I went back to them and said, hey guys, remember how I told you I wasn't interested? Well, I am. This is a really cool mission, and I think you guys are great. So let's rock and roll. So I got this head of recruitment job, and on day one, our head of operations says, Allison, we've got a code red. And I'm like, oh snap, what the heck does that mean in the startup world? Like, are we
Yeah.
literally going bankrupt on day one? Like, what did I do to myself here? And it was that we needed to hire 64 people within the next 6 weeks in order to
Oh,
onboard and train them. So that way those people could begin to deliver service by the first week of January, um, which was one of the seasonal peaks in the business. And so, also for context, they were typically hiring maybe 1 to 2 people a week at that point.
mm,
So to hire
mhm.
64 people in 6 weeks was basically like a pipe dream. So fast forward, you know, 6 weeks, we hit this recruiting goal, and
Wow.
I come back from the holiday break and get called into one of the meeting rooms with my co-founders, and they're like, "Hey, so remember that time when we interviewed you like 2 months ago and you said you wanted to be a chief people officer one day? Do you want to just be our head of people?" So I was once again taken very off guard, right? But by proving to them that I could drive value and letting them know what my ultimate goal was, they gave me that shot to really step squarely into the people side, not even just like in a little way, but as the department head, because
Mhm.
ultimately in that first people ops hire role, they did end up filling that position with an individual contributor. And I got promoted to be that person's manager whilst still managing the recruitment team.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know if that was necessarily promotion so much as being very clearly articulate with my goals that I had for my own career, and also driving value and showing, here's what I can do for you. And so it gave them the faith to say, hey, we actually do see Allison being capable of doing this. So let's make it happen.
Yeah. Nice. Besides communication, the communication is a key strategy, but what are some ways that you can self promote? Like, I can imagine it's not just talking to your boss, right? I mean, that's one part of it, but that you can't guarantee that your boss is going to advocate for you. So
Hmm.
what are some ways that you've seen work that people should focus on promoting themselves?
Yeah. And I think it's important to determine what the goal is, right? Like,
Mm,
why is that self promotion important? And so, if your goal is, for example, to climb the corporate ladder, for example, right? You really need to think less about self promotion and more about knowing your audience and speaking their language. So, if you can use data and highlight how business results came as a result of things you specifically did, that will do all of the promotion you need in a lot of cases, right? And
mhm.
so, but you also have to be really specific, right? You can't just say, oh, well, you know, I built or I did this whole compensation analysis at my last company, and that was my first time, building out a whole total rewards philosophy and strategy. Instead, to make the impact, right, you want to say, and as a result of doing that compensation analysis, we were able to increase our retention from X percentage to Y percentage, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you were able to reduce attrition from X to Y, right? You want to talk about what the impact actually was of what you did on the business. And that's all the self promotion you need. So,
Mhm. With with that, so who do you recommend telling that to? So I'm thinking, and maybe you can help people or help me like talk about if I wanted to say that more than my boss, like if I wanted to tell my boss's boss, or if I wanted to communicate to other people in the organization, how would you suggest that people approach that? Again, because it's interesting. I've had conversations with people where they're like, I really thought having those meetings with my boss and telling my boss what I was doing and telling them what I needed was enough. But
Hmm.
then I find out that my boss is not the one making the actual decision on who gets promoted, like his or her boss, or the whole executive team was involved, and they didn't know who I was, so it just wasn't my time. Like, how do you, I don't, do you have any ideas or thoughts on how people can reach out just beyond their circle?
So I will say, and going back to everyone's favorite book, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, going up, certain levels and that skip level communication can be very offensive in some cultures.
Mm,
So kind of like test the waters within
yeah.
your company first to see if that is a kind of a norm or something that would be out of the ordinary. So,
Hmm.
like, for example, some cultures are substantially more hierarchical and then others are very flat. Typically, not always, but typically, earlier stage startups tend to be flatter than late stage scale ups and enterprise companies. Also, geographically, where are you based, right?
Hmm.
Like the Netherlands, very much not a hierarchical society, right? They will want to get ideas at all levels. If you are operating in the US, we kind of fall towards the middle of that spectrum, which is why I was like, depends on your
Yeah.
company. However, I will say one way to kind of get around that to hopefully be seen, right, by those outside of just your direct manager can be to have a strong peer group at the same level as yourself and
Hmm.
not self promote, but promote your friend and have your friend promote you.
Yeah.
So if your company has some kind of like recognition system, right? If I go and say, wow, Michelle, you absolutely crushed that last marketing campaign. I saw that we had, X amount of clicks and shares. That is helping your sister out,
Yeah.
and then hopefully Michelle does me a solid when she's like, wow, I've noticed that the talent acquisition team has been really bringing in exceptional talent for the past few months. So kudos to Allison and her team, right? Or whatever it may be. So that way, when the company's leaders are looking at, who's getting these kudos or brownie points or whatever your company calls it, right? They can see that you are driving results and other people are seeing it. And it doesn't have to be
Yes.
within your team. It could be within your team, but it could be totally cross functional. So, for example, at my last company, that person for me and vice versa was the director of customer support while I was in the people team, right? And so we were able to just really build each other up as, women leaders who were maybe not totally middle management, but not quite C suite either,
Hmm.
to get our results recognized throughout. So, peer groups is my
That's
strategy on that one.
great. Oh, that's perfect advice. Thank you for sharing that. And I know we're running short on time, so I want to make sure we talk about LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because we talked about, like, when we first talked, we talked a little bit about LinkedIn, and you believe I recall you had some thoughts on making sure that you're using LinkedIn as a strategy, even when you're not necessarily actively looking for a job. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So, as we've referenced multiple times already on today's call, coming from the talent acquisition background, I am a very heavy LinkedIn user. I know that those outside of the people in talent space are typically a little bit more scared to put themselves out there and network. But honestly, it is the best thing you can do for your career, right? So, with my new role, and I've been here for about, oh gosh, 3 months now. I got that through the power of networking, right? It was through a referral. And I'm pretty sure I originally met Lydia through LinkedIn. So shout out to Lydia Bowers, great, chief people officer. And, you know, there are so many folks who are open to networking on there, whether they're in your discipline, whether they're in your company or not. Um, it's always really great to follow thought leaders in your space. That's just free learning and development for you that they're putting right out there on the internet, right?
Right.
Um, and going beyond that too, if you can start to cultivate content, and you don't necessarily have to, right? Like if you're a director of engineering, then maybe you're doing that and snaps to you, but probably companies are looking to diversify the male dominated engineering team traditionally, right? Asterisk, with a little gender diversity there. Um, but in most cases, right, you can be seen by not only other thought leaders, you can have more of that collaboration. It can open up doors for future career opportunities with you. You can also just learn interesting things about the space that you're in, right? So, like, although I'm not in childcare technology anymore, I still follow a lot of founders and people in that space because at some point I want to become a parent. And right now in the United States, childcare, especially for infants and toddlers, is really expensive.
Yeah.
And so I hope somebody comes up with a solution before I become a parent, right? But I think that community is so powerful, and LinkedIn provides a community, right? And
Mhm.
so by creating content, you can have not only more followers, and hopefully start to build genuine connections on there with folks. Um, and sometimes maybe you need that outside of your employer, especially if you're in like a smaller business where perhaps things just feel very closed off and sometimes catty, but maybe not. It's nice
Yeah.
to have encouragement from a community, and LinkedIn provides that. So building out your LinkedIn presence can really only help you with regards to your growth and development from a learning perspective, and maybe even challenge ideas and perceptions that you had by reading some content, right? You don't have to
Yeah.
agree with everything. It is ultimately the internet, but also make those
Yeah.
introductions for future opportunities.
So do you recommend commenting on other people's content, and then in terms of like people like creating content, I imagine it doesn't need to be like you don't need to write a full article and post that every week.
Sure.
What kind of content are you thinking is, excuse me, for people starting? Like what would be the bare minimum that they should consider?
So I wouldn't use it like Facebook to say, oh, this is what I ate for dinner,
Right.
or are you going to see the new Hunger Games movie? Which, yes, I am later tonight. Um, but ultimately, you want to create content that provides someone else value, A, and B is something that you actually know something about. For
Hmm.
the love of whatever you believe in, please don't try to put a hot take out there if you're not actually a subject matter expert in that subject matter. The
Yeah.
number of times where I just see really terrible advice out there about recruitment or HR from people who have never held a job in recruitment or HR just because maybe they've interviewed people in their career, or maybe they had to partner with HR on a certain thing, does not necessarily mean that they have any idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're creating something that, you would find interesting and valuable, and hopefully somebody else will find it interesting and valuable.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. And then, are there any particular tips or things that people should reconsider when actually creating their profile? Is there something they should absolutely have, or things that they should stay away from in their profile?
Yes. So if you are job searching, even if you're not job searching, stay away from buzzwords or a lot of adjectives, or having your title on LinkedIn be anything other than what your actual job is. Like purple squirrel finder, as it turns out, does not come up in a search string if a recruiter is trying to recruit another recruiter, right? But if I say that I am a talent acquisition professional, the key terms talent acquisition will probably get pulled up in that search, right? Or customer service ninja. Nobody is hiring a ninja, and you're probably not actually a ninja, right? So just put what your actual job is. And especially if you are, at a certain level, right? Like director or manager or a VP, right? Um, the search terms can get pulled because recruiters are using Boolean search strings based on those titles.
Mm-hmm.
So using things like unicorn or squirrel or ninja or whatever, llama, I've seen so many weird things out there, are not going to help you be found. And people will be secretly laughing at someone still calling themselves a rock star a decade after it's cool to call yourself a rock star. Unless you are genuinely Steven Tyler, who is a great rock star. He
Oh,
deserves it.
good to know. I need to make sure I don't have rock star in my
And
profile.
and moreover, if anyone tells you if you're looking for work, don't use the green open to work banner, that is fake news. It is not desperate. Recruiters are looking to search and hire people who are open to work. Don't be afraid to use it. The people who are trying to spread a bad name to the open to work banner are not people who you actually want to work with.
Got it. Oh, good advice. That's perfect advice. And I never heard of purple squirrel finder, but I can gather what that means from.
Yes. I have actually seen it. It is someone's title currently on my LinkedIn. I won't say who.
Oh, no.
And they are a really good recruiter. I'm just like, why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Well, I have a few questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests if we could
Sure.
switch over to that mode. One is mentorship. Do you have a person in your career that you can look back to and attribute success to that you would call a mentor?
I actually got asked a similar question last week, and I think that I don't know that I would necessarily attribute success to this person, but my most recent mentor is actually a friend of mine who is a couple years younger than me. And what I get out of the mentorship slash friendship, honestly, is really what it is. I don't think that he definitely would not call himself my mentor. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't call him or me his mentor, vice versa. But it's turned into an unintentional mentorship, and that he challenges me to see things differently. Right. And so I really appreciate his perspective and way of thinking, because it helps me to really, what's the expression? Like walk in someone else's shoes and try to look at it from their perspective, which is very helpful in a people leadership capacity.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that because mentorship can come in all forms and doesn't need to be a formal, it's really just what you get out of it. So appreciate that perspective. Is there a routine or a ritual that you have that you do daily that you attribute your well-being to?
Um, well, I don't do this daily, but most days I will combine cold brew with Premier Protein. And I am notorious for not getting enough protein in my diet. And so I will say it has helped my well being because I've lost over 70 pounds in the last couple of years. So, that's been useful to my health and well being journey,
Wow.
by increasing my protein intake and therefore
Wow.
feeling fuller and satiated longer.
Oh, interesting. So it's just a powdered protein that you
Premier
buy and
Protein shakes, so you can get them at like a CVS or a Walgreens,
oh.
Walmart, literally anywhere. And they've only got 1 gram of sugar and 30 grams of protein in there. So,
Hmm.
you could use it like a meal replacement shake. I don't.
You just put it in your
Um,
cold brew.
yeah. And
Okay.
so it's like instead of a sugary creamer, right? And
Hmm.
it's also way more cost effective than Starbucks, which, even though I do love my Starbies, especially those holiday drinks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and today, this won't go out for a while, but I think today is Red Cup Day.
Mm,
So I
nice.
don't know if you're by a Starbucks, if you want to run out there.
Unfortunately, no. The Starbucks in this part of Cambridge closed a couple months
Okay.
ago. So yeah.
Uh, well, let me see, what song will you put on when you need a little confidence or energy boost, if there is one?
Ooh. So my like kind of happy song, I wouldn't say it's a confidence boost, and I also don't entirely know what the lyrics are saying because it's in Spanish, and my Spanish is like very okay-ish, not
Okay.
good. I'm married to a Nicaraguan man, so it's like increasingly better over time and chatting with my in-laws. But it's a song called Tacones Rojos by Sebastian Yatra. And
Yeah.
just like, it just sounds really happy and it translates to red heels. And so I feel like there's got to be some female empowerment in there.
Yes.
It just kind of like sounds like sunshine. And so I can't like not be happy when I listen to that song.
I love it. I love it. And one last question. Is there something you've bought in the last year under $100, around $100 that has made a difference in your life or your daily work?
Hmm. Um, well, I did buy a standing desk converter off of
Ah,
somebody in my apartment building, and that has been really nice because my posture is terrible.
yeah.
So being able to use that whenever I am working from home has been really nice.
Love that.
And because
Yeah.
it wasn't like brand new, I was able to get it for under 100 bucks.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been thinking I need to get one of those too. I find that I'm sitting too much. And even if I'm intentional about getting up and moving around, it just start to feel it.
Yep. Yep.
Um, well, Allison, I appreciate you coming on. You're officially part of our audience's hype squad now. Is there one last
Woohoo.
piece of advice or words of inspiration you would leave everybody with before we end our conversation?
Sure. The best advice I can give, and I share this with all of my team, is control the controllables. You can
Mm,
control your own reactions and emotions, but there will always be things that you cannot control. So just be mindful of that.
love it. Great words to end by. And if everybody wants to, where can people find you if they want to look up what you're doing, if they want to reach out to you, can they? And what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm, as we had discussed, a big fan of LinkedIn. And so that's definitely the best way to reach me. If you just search Allison Mairena Sproul, Allison has two L's and an I. So, yeah, that would be the best way.
Great. And we will also provide that in our show notes. So, with that, I appreciate your time so much. And Allison, thank you for coming on and sharing this great. I mean, I wish we had more time. There's so much I would love to get into, a lot of a lot of things unexplored in our conversation. But I appreciate everything that you shared, and hope that we stay in touch and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle.
All right, bye, Allison. Hi, everyone. This is Michelle again. If you enjoyed this conversation, hit subscribe so you don't miss out on our weekly episodes. And if you're really feeling it, please leave a review. We'd love to have your support. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter where we share things we're excited about, things we found funny or inspiring, and must-read leadership videos and articles we came across that week. You can subscribe by going to www.thebosstrack.com/weekly joy. That's www.thebosstrack.com/weekly joy. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.